Everybody comfortable? Good, good. Because this story starts 238 years ago. And what happened was, there's a guy named Benedict Arnold. And Benedict Arnold Trail goes up through Maine. And it goes along the Great Kennebec River. And Benedict Arnold left with 1,100 men. They starved the men, they didn't take care of them. He marched 250 miles to Quebec and got his ass kicked. But the story is not about Benedict Arnold, it's about the river, just so you know. So anyway, the Kennebec River by 1965 was the 10th most polluted river in the United States of America, which is not a great thing. And in come the tree huggers, and God bless them, because by the early 70s, the last log roll has been going down the river. By the late 70s, the river was declared clean and presented back to the people. And I owned a campground in Maine, in the woods, and there was a disc jockey on the radio, a guy named Ryan Cody. Ryan was touting the Great Kennebec River Whatever race. And that's a 6-mile race from Fort Western in Augusta to Gardner, Maine, and a couple towns in between. And my good idea was I'm going to enter the race. I went to sleep that night, woke up with a great idea. Central Maine Power had left a telephone pole on my property 3 years prior. It was pole number CMP 924-3406 whiskey. And that's a real number. Anyway, that pole, I figured, is 90% of the law. It's my pole now. I can keep it. So that was the base of my boat. It was a 50-foot pole. Now, then I went to the junkyard and got 2 Volkswagen bucket seats, mounted them on the pole. This all works. I had a 10-foot sea snark. If anyone knows what the sea snark was a styrofoam sailboat that they sold in 1970 for $99. And if you got the one with the cool advertising cigarettes on the sail, and I had that one. So I cut that sailboat down the middle with a chainsaw, mounted 2 outriggers. I then took a tree to the lumber mill, and they made me 4 2x8 16-foot pieces of wood, which you couldn't buy regular, but they made it for me at the lumber mill. I put the 2 at the front to find a point, and put 2 at the back. I got the rudder from the sea snark and put it in 2 in the back. And I looked at it, it was fabulous looking. And I mounted the sail with the cool advertisement in the front, which looked ridiculous. Because my boat now, if you be keeping score, was 82 feet long. And if you then add, now I put the back end of the boat on my boat trailer. I put a coupling on the front to catch the back of my car. I had a Chevy Suburban. If you then add the Chevy Suburban, you have 102 feet. Now, it didn't look that pretty yet. And my buddy, the contractor, came down and he said it needs paint. So I went off to get the paint, and I got to the store, and I didn't want to invest any more money into the boat, really. So I said, what do you have that's really, really cheap? And he had 5 gallons of 14-year-old paint that somebody turned down. And I said, I'll take it. He said, do you want to know what color it is? I said, no, it'll be a surprise. So I brought it back to the campground, and my friend, the contractor, he has an airless spraying machine. And at that point, he measured my boat and the car. And he said, Bob, you have a problem here. I said, what's that? He said, you exceed the maximum amount of footage allowed on the highway. So I said, who's going to catch me? He said, with 102 feet, it's hard to sneak down the highway. So, you know, it all gets together. He said, I think you need a special permit for this. So I went to get to Augusta, Maine, which is not that far away, to get the permit. and he's going to paint my boat. So I got the permit, and the problem with the permit was I wasn't allowed on the highway except between the hours of midnight and 2 a.m. That's the only time you're allowed to transport. And I had to have a chase car and a car in front of me. So it took 3 of us to do this. And when I got back, the contractor, my buddy Charlie, he says, "Bob, this is not going to float." So I immediately said, $25 it floats. So we bet. And he said, if it does float, you won't make Hollowell. That's halfway point. I said, another 25 are on. And we had another bet in between there that I couldn't get it to the river. And the last bet, of course, was finishing the race. So anyway, I came back, and as I came back, the disc jockey, Ryan Cody, was rolling down the hill into the campground. He was dating Nancy. Nancy was one of my employees who babysat my son. And he looked at it. By the way, it was yellow, very, very yellow. And Charlie painted everything. He painted the car seats, the sail, my boat trailer, everything was painted. Rick came down and looked at it, and he goes, "The big banana." And it was great. It was wonderful. So midnight that night, off we go. And we get down to the boat ramp in Augusta, and there were hundreds of people there. I mean, and as I arrived, I got a round of applause, which immediately that was like as much as I could ever guess for. So as I'm backing it into the river, something dawns on me. No one's saying, if it doesn't float, is this going to pull my car into the river? I figured, nah, I'm good. I back it in, and it floats. Yes, that's right. Tie it up, and people are partying, have a good time. Went back home, showed up the next day for the race. The race starts at 11, and they were touting the whole week. They were touting the big race is really between the University of Maine wrestlers challenged Bowdoin College wrestlers to a race, and the University of Maine had a 16-man Indian war canoe. All right, they were dressed with headdresses with paint on their faces. They looked great. And Bowdoin had the 2-man canoe, and that was going to be the big race. The way they start a race is they have 2 big party boats, and you got to show up to the line and not cross the line until they hit the big noise. So I got the thing going, and I had a guy with me to help me. On the boat, we had a 52-quart cooler with 2 cases of beer. We had food. We had a portable radio. We had suntan lotion. We were set. And some of the boats, they were just unbelievable. The Digital Corporation of Maine had a paddle wheel with men walking around in circles making the paddles work. It was terrific, it really was. And there was a Volkswagen with 4 55-gallon drums. And they were going to float down the river. There was a 6-pack of beer that had to be and built to scale half the size of this room and float down the river. And all in all, there were 200 boats. Okay? And there was going to be a remote broadcast of the event, and Rick was going to be the broadcaster. He's the local disc jockey. So anyway, we all start pulling up to the starting area, and I started losing control. It started like drifting. And as they hit the horn to start the race, my boat turned sideways. And do you remember the Hindenburg disaster? Rick, the disc jockey with his great disc jockey voice. "Oh no, this is horrible. The big banana is blocking the race." And I'm hearing it on my own radio, and we were hysterical. Luckily, the people that was important to got going, I only blocked about 30 or 40 boats, so it's not. And we were floating down the river with everybody else. It was a real big party is what it was. It was actually a lot of fun. But I started lagging behind everybody else after a while. And one of the guys I forgot to tell you about, he had a wreath around his head. He was wearing a loincloth. He had 2 flotation billets, 1 on each foot, and it said, from a distance, it looked like JCWOW. His name was John Carter, by the way, but he wanted it to look like Jesus Christ, and WOW was walking on water. So I was getting lonely now at this point. Just Jake and I were on the boat, and up walks Jesus Christ on the water. We offered him a beer, we broke bread, gave him lunch, and he walked on. Now at this point, it was very lonely out there. And we did finally make it in. All right, I made all my bets, but it was sort of a downer because the parties were ending and we were like just getting in. So not to end the story on a down note, I'll do a little recap. First of all, Rick and Nancy got married and lived happily ever after, and they're still my friends. Rick was inducted into the Broadcasters Hall of Fame, and you can still get him up there in Maine. He's still working. Out of the 200 boats, well, let me just say it this way. I finished in the top 60 percentile. However, 70 boats didn't finish, so I was dead last. So it depends how you say it, what sounds good. And I did get 2 trophies, 1 for the longest boat, and 2 for the most unusual boat. And just so I'm not part of the problem, I'm part of the cure, when I got back to the campground, I called Central Maine Power and said, telephone pole number 324-3406 Whiskey is blocking the Gardner boat ramp, you better move it.